Okay, in this video I'm going to take a look at the driver's wish maps of the EDC17 file that I did a quick guide flick through in the previous video. I'm just going to flick through the file until I can spot the driver's wish maps. Now there they are. Now I've already highlighted these, which is why they're yellow. The maps here will be picked up most of the time by Winols, so in fact they will have the little green outline around them telling you that Winols has found those, because it usually finds these okay. If it doesn't, obviously we've got the characteristic shape, and they are very often 8 by 16 or 8 by 12, that sort of size. Now what we've got here is 1, 2, 3, 4 fairly similar looking maps looking down here, another one here which looks similar to those, and then one that looks slightly different. Now these are probably driver's wish map 1, 2, 3 and 4, not for 4 gears but for 4 speed ranges which relate to engine speed and vehicle speed. In other words, they are based on a ratio of engine speed to vehicle speed, or what's known as the VN ratio. These 4 probably apply whether you've got a 5-speed gearbox or a 6-speed gearbox, as long as all of the ratios can be covered by those 4 maps. This, I suspect, will be for reverse gear, and then this one is probably for 4-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. Now obviously normally at this point I would double click on one of these maps and it would have the raw data in it here, but I've already changed the raw data on this one, which is why they're showing up as yellow. But what I'll do is I'll go through this as if I was changing the raw data so that you've got a chance to see what's going on here. First of all, I've got engine speed down here in revs per minute. Now if I click on that one, what I'll do is I will double click on it and that will bring it up in the properties box, and you can see that I've put in engine speed, revs per minute, and the difference here between EDC16 and 17 is that the factor is 0.5, whereas the factor in an EDC16 would usually be 1. So in other words, it's 0.5. Now that makes the rev per minute access fairly easy to spot, because if I go back, I'll just close that. If you watch this column while I mouse over the original figure here of, there we are, at ×1, you can see that those are very large numbers. I mean, it peaks at 10,710. And there aren't many values in files with numbers as large as that, but of course with a factor of 0.5, I'll just move away, it drops it down to 5,355, which is a fairly normal value for engine speed. Here at the top, similar sort of thing. In other words, if I go back up, at the moment it's reading from 1 to 100, but if I go back up here, what it's actually reading is 82 up to 8192. Now the clue here is the 8192. 8192 almost certainly means that that number is going to be 1. So it could be 1, or it could be 1 multiplied by 10, so it could be 10, or 1 multiplied by 100, so it could be 100. So in other words, you would expect this to be a series of numbers that peaked either at 1 or perhaps 10 or perhaps 100, depending on where the decimal point would be. And if you look at this one, so if I double click on this one, The factor here is 0.0122, and sometimes there's a 7 on the end, because if you need more decimal points you might need to put the 7 on the end. It makes no difference. If I put the 7 on now, it's not likely to make any difference to the value. So if I go back to there, it's changed that very slightly to 101. As I suspect I want it to be 100, I'll just leave it like that. But it makes very little difference to the result. But sometimes you might find that you do need to add a slight difference. Now, where does that factor come from? Well, it's very, very simple. If I go back to here, you've got the 8192. That factor is simply the number 1 divided by 8192. So if you want to know the value, you just divide 1 by 8192 and that will give you that factor. Now, in this case, I'm using 100 divided by 8192 because I want the total answer to be out of 100 rather than out of 1. Very often you find maps where the output or the number you're looking for is a factor which is based on 1. In other words, the maximum would be 1. So then the factor that you want would be 1 divided by 8192. Because I want this to go up to 100, I'm using 100 divided by 8192, and that's how I end up with 0.0122. I would have a couple of extra noughts in here if it was based on 1 rather than 100. Now, of course, the reason I want it based on 100 is I'm going to assume that this is the accelerator pedal being pressed down and it's running from 0 to 100%. Right, output. The output we've got here, in some EDC16s this would be injection quantity, usually in milligrams. In some it will be torque. In pretty much every EDC17 that I've seen, it is torque. So in other words, this value here will be torque in Newton meters. And if we look at the raw values again, you can see that what I've got is a maximum of somewhere around about 4,600, and that equates to 460 Newton meters of torque. So there's my sort of maximum torque. And again, if I go to here and I look at where I've put in the name driver's wish map, I've just called it driver's wish map 1 for the sake of argument, description, torque, unit, Newton meters, and 0.1 for the factor, which it has to be 0.1, because if we were to use 1, then that would read 4,600, which would obviously be ridiculously high, and if it was less than 0.1, then this would be 46, and of course that would be ridiculously low. So it pretty much picks itself. It has to be 0.1. Now obviously that set of factors used for speed, used for accelerator position, and used for torque output, that will apply to each of these in turn, so they will all be the same. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 maps here. They will all use the same factors. So what I can do if I want to is, while this one's open, I can press Control, Alternate and C, and it will ask me what properties I would like to copy, and I can just say, well, I'll copy all of those. I don't want to copy the contents, and I won't worry about type and size, even though they are the same. I'll leave it like that, but I'll keep everything else okay. So I'll just say OK, and now of course if I open this one, it's already been changed, so I haven't got to make any changes. But if I was to press Control V, the contents, name, factors, everything else that were on this first one would now be copied to this second one, and I can prove that because if I now open it, it says driver's wish map 1, and it did say driver's wish map 2, so I'll just change it back to driver's wish map 2 and say OK, and you can see what I mean, because if I look at this one and I open it, you can see there it is, driver's wish map 3. And if I was now to say Control V and then have a look, it's become 1 because it's copied everything from number 1 over onto here, but I'd still like it to read 3, so I'll change it back to 3 and say OK. And so I can continue across and do that to all of those. Obviously this one will probably become known as all-wheel drive, so if I open that one, I've probably put in there driver's wish map. There we are, all-wheel drive with a question mark. I think it's all-wheel drive. And this one I probably put in as reverse, and I have same factors for all of them, so they're all using the same number system. So that's your driver's wish maps. Found them, changed the values, they're now easy to read. If we just open one and double check the view, if we look at the 3D view, it looks very much like what you would see on an EDC17, so it helps confirm, yep, this is a driver's wish map that we're looking at. Right, rather than going on forever, I will stop at that point